You are listening to a recording from the Cooperating to Build a Better Nova Scotia conference in Halifax, a celebration marking the United Nations International Year of Cooperatives.
Hi there, welcome. We're reporting from Cooperating to Build a Better Nova Scotia here at Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax. This is Erin, Hancock with the Canadian Co-operative Association and the Measuring the Cooperative Difference Research Network. I've got with me a very special guest, Justin Ellerby. Justin, tell us a little bit about your program. You're now involved in the Masters in Business Administration and Community Economic Development out of Cape Breton University. So how is it that you came to get involved in that program?
I came to find out about the Cape Breton University MBA in Community Economic Development after a very long search for graduate level studies in business that were relevant to co-ops. There had been programs like that in the States at different times in the past, but they had been defunded over the years or just slipped by the wayside, or were operating strictly for agricultural co-ops, large ag co-ops. And so I ended up traveling all the way from California clear across the continent to Nova Scotia. Actually, it was initially someone from the University of Wisconsin that happened to know about a researcher, Catherine Leviton-Reed, and who used to work at University of Wisconsin and is a professor of mine now at Cape Breton University.
Okay, thank you. And you came upon this program because you were already very heavily involved in the co-op movement in California. Tell us a little bit about that.
I have been a co-op junkie for the last 12 years, pretty much. I started out in student housing co-ops in Santa Cruz, and then moved to Davis to go to UC Davis to finish my undergraduate in international agricultural development. Partly because there was a cooperative focus on, or there were cooperative venues to explore that discipline there. While I was there, I lived in and eventually was privileged to become president of Solar Community Housing Association, 32-year-old co-op in Davis, California. And while I was there, that co-op expanded, and in all kinds of ways. We got a third house, and then we saved a sister co-housing community that was twice our size. We basically tripled in size while I was there. It was a tremendous learning experience. And all while that was going on, I was working for the California Center for Cooperative Development as a specialist, putting on, helped co-organize a conference, did a 1.5-year-long research and extension report for dairy cooperatives, generally issuing co-opist propaganda to the masses. And then, if that wasn't enough, I also was part of the North American Students of Cooperation, the binational Canadian and American apex organization for mostly student housing cooperatives.
Great. Thank you so much, Justin. So it's fair to say that you've got a long and strong history in the co-op movement. And so just tonight, we've come out of the our first keynote address of the conference. We had Alain Waugh from the Rural and Cooperative Secretariat with the Government of Canada speaking to us. And he certainly gave us a lot to chew on. So I mean, given your history, I think it's fair that we can, further chew together on some of the things that he brought forward. So he spoke a bit about myths of cooperation, and he tried to talk to us about, how it is that people in the general public talk about cooperatives, and also how we as cooperatives tout some of the things that we do and we achieve, but that's not always based in reality, or sometimes we're not being totally accurate about how it is the movement actually works. So if you can think and reflect about what you've learned in your practice as a developer and working with the center and working in housing co-ops, what would you say are some of the myths of cooperation that you would like to speak a bit about tonight?
Sure. Like in terms of the myths that we as cooperators tell each other and ourselves,
Sure, or also public. We've heard a lot of people in the public talk about cooperatives as being either just small institutions or just for rural or just farming institutions. And we know that that's not accurate. Obviously, we've seen, especially in the International Year of Cooperatives this year, 2012 is declared by the United Nations, we've seen a lot of very sophisticated businesses that are run as cooperatives globally make a huge economic impact. So, I mean, certainly you can speak to either public conceptions of the movement and what hasn't quite jived with you in your own experience, or also internally. It's up to you.
Great. Well, I'll try to sprawl all over the map there. In terms of myths, I think the myths of cooperatives, I think they're out in the public mind. One aspect of them is really well encapsulated by the time, an experience that I had when I was working as a property manager at the Pacifico Housing Co-op, working at CCCD. At that program, the house at that time was having a lot of people come into it through a transitional foster youth program. And one of the folks that came into the program on the first day I was helping to get moved in said, okay, so this is how co-op works. And he actually just interrupted me. He was like, oh no, I've been in a group home. Like, I get it. Like, right, there's rules, and like, where one of you guys are going to tell me like what to do essentially. And there's, we're going to have to be held to these strict standards. And then there's going to be food that we all share. And I was charmed at the similarities, and in some ways I had some very simple reasons like, oh no, that's not really what we are. But then in some other ways, that is what we're about. In a lot of contexts that people are familiar with group sharing of provisions, it's in distress situations or marginal situations. So people see, think of group living or sharing of resources, and they think, oh, those people must have just had a hurricane hit their house, or they must be old, or they must be somehow unable to make it out in the big world. And there's a grain of truth to that, but I feel the grain of it is that none of us are really safe in a rapacious capitalist economy. We're really all very vulnerable, and that becomes apparent only when it's too late. So there's a lot of other myths I would say that are out in the public that I hear. Another is that co-ops just don't work. That people don't take care of it, of co-ops and cooperative assets, because the accountability and responsibility and personal relationship of ownership is diffused throughout the organization and its assets. People don't take that great care of their own stuff necessarily, and that gets lost in the conversation sometimes. So yeah, there's a lot of myths out there. As a cooperator, though, and as being at a cooperative conference, and also having totally inundated myself with a lot of lectures by the philosopher Slavoj Žižek recently, who talks a lot about ideology and its importance and its functions. I've been thinking a lot about the meaning of ideology to co-ops and how it sustains us and energizes us, but also can help us sort of create some possibly unhelpful allegiances within, quote unquote, the movement, to co-ops that maybe aren't really living entirely by the principles. And we should always be vigilant in questioning each other and have faith that we're all trying to do the best that we can, but also be receptive to critique.
Thank you very much, Justin. I think it's fair to say that there's been a lot of discussion this year about what distinguishes cooperatives. Certainly within the Measuring the Cooperative Difference Research Network, the question often comes up: different from what? Who is it that we're comparing ourselves to? And what is it that we're doing? What is the value added? And so if you had to answer that question, what do we mean when in the movement we talk about this idea of the cooperative difference?
The place that I would want to go to most authentically, there's different sorts of metrics that look at how the flow of resources and finances works between co-ops and for-profit institutions. The truth is, at larger scales, sometimes it is harder to tell the difference between those two sectors, but nonetheless, to me, the real difference is in the personal, sort of emotional, psychological relationship that members have with an institution or organization that they mutually own. There's just something a little bit different about how you interact with the business when you know that you actually own and govern it. And even, I mean, especially for larger cooperatives, perhaps there's a lot of their members that don't regularly vote every year when their ballots are mailed out to them. Nonetheless, those organizations know that if they do take certain actions that they know their membership would object to, that the membership is going to come back and bite them and hold them accountable eventually. So even without a really active sort of a member relationship there, just sort of the threat that backs up off there is something that is shareholder-based, shareholder-invested firms don't really have to worry about in the same way. And that's good. That's a whole other level of accountability that creates much better outcomes for people personally, as consumers, as members, and for society as a whole.
Thank you. And what in tonight's speech, the address from Alain Roy, really stood out to you? What was resonating, and what are you still pondering now that it's finished?
One thing that there was a question, the last question that was asked of the evening, I thought was fascinating. A gentleman asked Alan to comment on the relationship between trade unions and cooperatives, and with worker co-ops possibly being triangulated in between there. And his answer was had so much there that I'm still really trying to process a little bit. One thing he mentioned was sort of the fact that that co-ops have been used by unions and in different ways, like to do like experimental sorts of businesses. And he even gave an example. I'm not sure how unions fit into this, but the fact that the French railway system, he said, before it was government owned, it was actually owned as a cooperative. So to me, that gets at some very interesting issues, both basically in terms of how co-ops are able to capture the value, as you would say in the corporate world, of the experiments that they offer. Co-ops are this wonderful laboratory for a lot of different services and provisions, and they're so open and so transparent that those innovations oftentimes fly out of their hands and are co-opted, if you will, by the corporate world, which is kind of a good thing. I mean, best example I can think of is the way that the organic food movement is taken off for the Whole Foods of the world, large high-end retailers of organic foods. They would not have existed if it were not for many hundreds of small clubs of informal groups meeting all over North America. Now those same co-ops that have evolved from there do not see the profits that from the market that they created for people like Whole Foods.
Gotcha. So if we look at this concept you've raised about the intersection of cooperatives and unions, from your understanding, where is that intersection? How would you define it?
It's a topic that I don't know nearly enough about, but am fascinated by. Again, going back to this common thread of ideology, in the sense that unions have typically, when they were first arising, to my understanding, really depended on idealism of a sort, solidarity, perceived common interest among laborers, and the stakes were extraordinarily high. I mean, when they were first starting the course, that you could literally die for being part of a union, for taking part of union action. The state there was no National Labor Relations Board like we have in the States now. The cops were active in murdering union workers, and there's then this sense of at least strictly in the popular perception of where unions have come since then, from being a heroic sort of underdog figure to being not seen very kindly by a lot of people, including working class folks. A lot of the time, I think cooperatives have to watch out for that kind of backlash too, in the sense that even though co-ops are open to new membership, much of the time, they still are predicated on exclusion to some respect. Exclusion of certain benefits and rights on behalf of their members against anyone who isn't a member. Their saving grace is that usually they're fairly open in their membership, but if you don't want to be a member, if you can't for whatever reason, then to that degree, the movement, I think, does suffer some risk of feeling some backlash from public support and government support.
Thank you. So in your experience, if you could reach out to people and impart some knowledge that you've been able to develop, looking back at all the different work that you've done in development and in research, tell me what it is you would tell co-ops. If it was a recipe, what kinds of things would you add more of and would you add less of?
Oh, the thing that would retain and if anything add more of undoubtedly would be the heart and the love and the mutual respect that people in a room together can feel when they're doing this work. That presents some difficulties to scaling up, but it has been very rare that I've been in a situation working with a co-op or in a co-op and in a room with people and have not felt connection to them as human beings, as people who are trying to get by in this big crazy world that we all have to live in and then go to sleep inside of. And at the worst case, that sort of the most fractious people that I've had to work with in the co-op movement we've given each other learning moments of conflict resolution. And oftentimes the people that I feel very, very close to in the movement and in co-ops oftentimes manage to rile me up the best, and vice versa, I'm sure. That's a beautiful, wonderful thing. Conflict prevention is not what life and growth is about. Conflict resolution is, and co-ops are an amazing vehicle for that and for personal transformation.
Thank you very much, Justin. We're going to have Peter Huff come join us in just a moment, but we'd like to thank you, Justin, certainly in sharing with us some of your experiences, but also in bringing forward a little bit of exposure to a very interesting program out of Cape Breton University, again, the Masters in Business Administration and Community Economic Development. So thank you, Justin.
Thanks so much for having me, Erin.